Hi, welcome back. The last time we were able to download the calligraphy framework locally in our local environment, and we got into the code. We looked at the file structure of calligraphy, and hopefully by now you can at least have it installed on your machine, and you're able to identify. I'm not saying that you'll be able to know exactly what goes where, but rather you're able to identify some of the folders that are contained within the calligraphy framework. And I hope that the different concepts that we talked about last time resonated enough with you. Now, of course, we need to put all this in practice, because if you don't practice them, if you don't see them live, they might not mean much to you. So starting today, we will be coding directly into calligraphy. Okay, and what we're going to do throughout this lecture and for the rest of the course, we are going to create a mini portfolio kind of thing for you. So it's more of an application that would allow you to showcase some of your projects. And what we're going to end up doing, we're going to provide a way to have access. It's going to be a private application, so we're gonna require some authentication that will allow certain users to see certain pages and things like that. And we're gonna maybe apply some permissions on the user. So this is really the goal that we're gonna try and achieve together in this course. Now, in order for us to start from a clean state, I don't want us necessarily to use the clone or the copy of calligraphy that we used the last time in order to show the installation. We're going to start from fresh again, so we're going to repeat some of the steps that we did last time, but we will obviously spend a lot less time explaining what we're doing. And then the gist of the lecture today is going to be around routes and how we can create routes. So hopefully we'll understand them more. We're gonna learn, the basic format of what a controller is, and how we can code it and how we can use it. And we are going to learn about another concept, which is the request concept, or the request class, that is contained within calligraphy, and what it allows us to do. So this is a little bit of a summary of what we're going to do in the lecture today. So let's go ahead and go to our lecture. That is, I believe, lecture 7 right now. And in lecture 7, it's all about routing, requests, and controllers. So in the instructions, you are going to see each in a separate section alone, explained in a very thorough and exhaustive fashion. It might be using different examples than the one I will be using in the lecture today, but that is okay, because it gives you more flexibility, or it gives you probably more. It illustrates slightly more examples to you than what you're going to see in the lecture. Okay, so let's go ahead. The first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to replicate again our calligraphy framework. So we're going to go ahead and download it again. And in order for us to do that, we are going to go back to the lecture from last time. If you didn't bookmark the link to the calligraphy GitHub, you can always search for it on calligraphy, or you can find it in the resources in Udemy. Otherwise, you can go to lecture 6, and from lecture 6 you can get to the calligraphy page. On the calligraphy page, if you remember well, we are going to clone this path over here. We're going to go to our terminal. Make sure you go to routes again. And right now, I am literally going to clone it directly into the document root folder. Okay, which happens to be sites for me. It might be something else for you. So in order to do that, I'm going to do git clone. Okay, and I'm going to copy the path, and I'm going to give it a name that we're going to call showcase. Okay, and I hope you all follow the same name like this. You don't have to do any extra work. So let's go ahead and do that. It's going to clone it for us. Okay, and apparently it's done. So if I do show CD showcase, and I do a listing, and here it is. I have my entire folder. Now, if you remember well from last time, what we need to do is we need to copy .env example into .m. So let's do that now. And the last step is really to do a composer install to get all the dependencies. So now they are installing. Let's give them a couple of seconds. All right, I might prompt you. You say yes. And then it got installed. Okay, so now Caligraphy is fully installed. Now let's open our editor. I use brackets in case you forgot that, and just to make sure that we have access to the folder. So we're going to open the folder. It's under site and it's called showcase. So here we go. We'll open the entire structure and we have it ready for us to be used. Now I would like us at this stage to completely kill the link with the repository that is on Caligraphy. In order to do this, if you remember from last time, there is a .git folder that is a hidden folder, and we want to delete that one because we want to create our own this time. So we're going to do a sudo rm-r, and what we're going to do is remove the .git. So let's do that. And now if I do a listing again and I do get status, should give me an error because there is no more link. There is no more of a link to the GitHub. Great. So now that we have that, what we're going to do next is go to our .m file and make sure to change our app root this time. It is going to be showcase. Why? Because showcase is directly into the root. Okay, so we don't need to add anything to it. This is exactly where the root for our file structure for showcase is. So this is good, and we're gonna save that, and the rest you can keep it the same for the time being up until when we start talking about databases. Then we'll come back and do some changes over here. But until then, we don't need to do anything just yet. So now that everything is installed, how do we check if the framework works? And if you remember well, everything that is PHP or web programming, the way to test things out is directly into the browser. And according to the path that we gave under localhost, if I do showcase, it should start doing something. Okay, so let's see. It says hello world. All right, great. So in order for us to know what happens really when we type a request like that or a URI like that, is to go into the config folder that is under application, and to go to the routing folder and open the web.php, because that's where we left off last time. This is where all the magic of routing happens. So let's take a look at what this routing file and web.php, what it's doing. What it's doing is, if we jump directly in here, there is a bunch of things that are commented. We're not going to get into them just yet. We're going to get directly into these two statements that are the ones given to us out of the box. Okay, so what it's doing is it's calling a class called route, which is coming directly from the core classes that are defined in the brain of Caligraphy, and it's calling a function. So this is a static class. Okay, when a static class is created, and when we need to call a function within that static class, in PHP, this is how we do it. You call the name of the class, you put two columns, and then you call the name of the method. And in this particular case, the method is called get. Okay, why is it a get? Usually, the routes, they follow the HTTP methods. Okay, now we have several HTTP methods, but in Caligraphy there are 4 of them that are implemented, and and those are the ones that are the mostly used out there, specifically for smaller applications, such as the ones Caligraphy allows you to create. So there are 4 HTTP methods. You have the get, you have the post, you have the put, and you have the delete. Okay, those HTTP methods, the one probably that you know the most about is the get. The get is really a method that calls the server to fetch information from it. So it's really meant for reading purposes. So anytime you go to any web application, from the moment you just call the URI, if you type, let's say, google.com, what this is doing, it's sending a GET request to the Google server, and it's asking it to get you the content and to read the information of what you're getting out of it, what the URI is calling from it. So that's really what a GET is. It's for read-only information that is going and fetching information from the database and displaying it to the user without making any modifications or any updates on the database. The second one that you might be very familiar with is the POST request. The POST request is very common in the HTML world, because every time you are filling a form, whether it's a credential form, so a logging in form, username and password, whether it's a registration form, whether even it's a payment, all of these types of forms, they are sent to the server in the form of an HTTP POST method. Okay, and what it does, it's usually doing two things. It's either updating the database, or it's creating a new record in the database. The real use for it is to create a new record in the database. So if you go back to the lecture when we started talking about MySQL, what a POST function is going to end up doing, it's going to add a row in a table, or in a row in multiple tables. But mainly what it's doing is it's acting on the tables. In some situations, it might be used for updating as well. So not just for adding, but also for updating. And typically, HTML in most browsers, it uses the POST form in order to do those two things, in order to do a post and an update. Okay, so to create new records, but also in updating records in the databases. Great. Now there is a third one which you might be less familiar with, and that is the put. It usually specifically when you're working with a web application and older versions of browsers, not all of them support the put method. Okay, so not all of the HTML older versions of HTML as well do not all support the put method. And what the put method is, it's solely used for updating the databases. Okay, so that is changing an existing record, not adding a new one. You would use, typically in this new world, you would use a put method. Now, in order for us, since HTML doesn't necessarily support put HTTP requests, Calligraphy has a way to allow you or to allow HTML to do that. Okay, we kind of trap the post method and fabricate it in a way that it's changed the request into a put request. That's how Calligraphy does it. So I just want you to keep in mind that every time you want to do an update through Calligraphy, you can use the update call. The update call route, and we will see all this together, so I don't want you to worry. And the last one is a delete, and the delete, just like the name indicates, is really about deleting a record and removing it entirely from the database. So with that said, over here you can apply any one of those four methods. It could be a get, it could be a post, it could be an update, or a delete. And if you think about it, those are really the CRUD functions that we talked about at some point when we were talking about MySQL. Okay, CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. And this is exactly what these four HTTP methods allow you to do. Great. Now every method in PHP on any other languages might need to take some arguments, okay? And the way PHP does it, and most object-oriented languages do it, they always have you open the parentheses and the arguments are contained within. So now it's good to understand what are the arguments that we're giving to our get method. Our get method always, as well as the post and the delete, they always take two arguments when you're called, and those are specifically the ones called from the root. There are two arguments that need to be given. One of them is the URI or the path, and this is typically what you will end up as a user typing in the browser. So if you type localhost only, that's exactly what the slash is about, or you could leave it empty, both of them are correct. Okay, so that's one argument. It's the URI that you type. The second argument is what happens when the user enters such a URI. So in this case, it's a slash, in this case, it's slash view. Then something happens, and that thing is defined in the second argument. Now, the second argument in these both cases that are given to us out of the box, those are functions that are created immediately in here, okay? So over here, we are creating immediately that function, and that we call a callback function. And that callback function, which doesn't take any arguments, this is why it has parentheses, what it does is it echoes. So now if you remember our PHP primer lesson, echo is a way to display a string. And what it's doing, so what this function is doing, it's not taking any argument and it doesn't have a name. This is why we call it a callback function, because it's an anonymous function that is created on the spot directly in here. And what it's doing is it's displaying a hello world. And that is exactly, if I go back to the browser, when I do localhost showcase, okay, and I'm not entering anything after this because this is where my root is, and that's what the slash means, it is echoing a hello world. Great. So now that we understood this, so then what is the next one doing? The next one is saying that if you do slash view after showcase, then it's going to return a view for us, and that view will be taking an argument default slash index. So what this function is doing, and this is a core helper function, if you remember from our last lecture, so it's a global function. What it's doing is it's calling our view class, and it's telling it use the template that is called index, and that can be found under the folder default. Great, so let's go take a look there. And we're not going to dig deeper just yet into how to create those views. For the time being, we're just going to use them the way they are, just to give you an idea on how we can use these functionalities. So ideally, under the view folder over here, I have another folder called default. There it is. And under default, I have an index. Okay, and this is exactly what the view that is being called. And that index has an extension pug. Pug is really the language that Calligraphy uses in order to create those templates. And we will learn all about pug whenever we talk about the views. So what this function is doing, it's saying return a view, and more precisely, return the index view when I type slash view. So let's go and take a look at what this looks like in the browser. If I do slash view like that, here we go. It gives you some form of a UI. Of course, it's very basic. It has a navigation. It has a navigation. It has a header. It has a footer, and then it has some content. Okay, it's empty at this stage of the game, but it's a good reinforcement that the framework is working and is working all right. Great. So now let's go back to the code. This is one way of calling of having, if you want, a route do something. Let's delete them, okay, and let's create our own. Let's do route get, and let's always define what happens when nothing is entered, okay? And typically in situations like this, you would want your main public page to be there, whether it be a login page, whether it be a welcome page, no matter what it is. Usually at the root, you want to put your welcome message. This is like your exhibition room kind of thing. Great. Now, for the time being, let's again. I'm not going to necessarily replicate the same thing. So let's do, this is my first test paragraph. Okay. And you always end the statement with a semicolon. Okay. And when you call a function, make sure you open the curly brackets. Great. So let's do that. Now, my code has changed. So if I do this with empty, this is my test paragraph. So this is one way of telling the route, every time a URI is entered, I want you to execute this function. Great. But there is another way to do this. Why? Because you do not want a lot of logic in this file. And can you imagine if you start writing a lot of logic in here, then this file can become quite dense. And this is where the controller comes into play, because the controller can actually contain all the actions that you want to perform, or all the logic that you want to perform from the moment a certain URI is called from the browser. So you want to hand off this request, you want to hand it off to a to a controller. So how do we do this? Before doing anything, we need to create a controller. Great. So now we go to our controller section, and we're going to go ahead and create a file, okay? And this file will be our controller. Now, I don't want you to be worried about where to place the file and so on and so forth. What you need to understand is no matter what structure you create under the controllers, the Caligraphy is always capable of getting the controller and reading it for you. There is, however, a convention that needs to be used. Every controller needs to end with the word controller. So let's do two things over here. Every file that we are going to create from this point on, okay, let's for the time being create it under a folder, and let's call it projects, okay? And under this folder, I'm going to create a new folder, a new file. I created a folder, so let's delete it. We're going to create a file. We're going to call it project controller. The way to call classes in PHP, every class always needs to start with a capital letter, okay? And since the convention is to always append the word controller whenever we're creating a controller, then in that case, we use a camel case. So both words will start with a capital letter. Great. Now we have our project controller. It's obviously empty right now. What do we do with it? A controller is a PHP file. It always starts with the tag for PHP. Now, whenever we do not have any HTML or any display language within our PHP files, you don't need to close the PHP at the end, okay? It doesn't matter, okay? The best practice standard is not to close it whenever it only contains logic files that are compiled on the server. So no CSS, no HTML, or no any other client-side language. And those are the languages that are executed by the browser. Okay, everything that is executed on the client side, PHP and so on, can be contained within here without having to close the brackets. Okay, so now that we have that, how do we start to create a controller? There is something in general in any third-party tool or third-party code that you download called namespace. A namespace, and I will get to explaining what it is, but consider a situation where you have different third-party tools, or again code that you're using, such as Caligraphy, but Caligraphy also uses other dependencies and things like that. There is a high chance that some classes might be called the same name, okay? So I might call a class banana, but maybe another developer in their for a third-party tool that I'm using might have called their class banana. So you might end up with situations where there's conflicts in naming. In order to avoid these conflicts, every provider or every third-party tool or third-party code needs to define their own namespace that is reserved to them, such as if you call banana, okay, that the code would know which banana to use. Is it the banana coming from my code, or is it the banana coming from a third-party code? And the way to do this is by making sure that you always add the following statement to your PHP files. So in this case, we're using Caligraphy, so we're going to say use Caligraphy because that is the namespace for Caligraphy. It's Caligraphy. It could be something else, but in our case, it is Caligraphy. And what we're going to be using in this particular file, we're going to be using the controller class that is contained within the framework core, and we're going to use controller. Okay, it's a big file, has a lot of items in it. You can feel free to go ahead and read it well, but this is mainly what we're going to be using out of our namespace. Why? Because we are creating a controller. Okay, good. So now that we have that, the next thing that we need to do is everything that you create within the application folder needs to be a class. Okay? And from the moment it's a class, it could be used anywhere in the application without having to import or to require or to include or anything like that. You just need automatically use the class immediately. Great. So in order to create a class in PHP, the word obviously is class to declare it. So the declaration word is class. And then in our case, we are going to call it project controller. Make sure that whatever you name here needs to be the same as the file name. In our case, it's project controller, so it needs to be project controller. Great. Now, typically, this is how you create a class in PHP. Now, in our case, we want our class to have at least, not exactly, but to have at least all the functionalities that are contained within the main core class that is defined in the framework, so in Caligraphy. And in order to do this, there is a concept called inheritance in object-oriented languages, where you are able to let a class inherit some or all the functionalities that are present in a parent class. So in order to do this, you would use the word extends. What this says, I am saying that I would like my project controller to extend anything that is within my controller class. Okay, so now my project controller contains all the functionalities and all the features that controller has, and that obviously have been allowed to be used in a child. So in project controller in our case. Okay, great. Now, from this point on, every class can have several methods within it. Okay. And what you need to understand is that project controller is a class that extends controller, and it is instantiated, which means it is an object. The difference between a static class and an object is that the object is declared exactly the same way, but the object is instantiated, meaning every time it's being used, you need to create another instance, which means another copy of that class and all its functionality over and over again. Whereas a static class, it is always the same instance or the same copy that is being used across everybody that uses it. So now that we have this set, you can add as many methods as you need inside this class. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a function that we're going to call index. And I'll tell you why I'm creating specifically index. Okay, but I could also have a class called banana if I want to. Let's just do banana just for illustration purposes. Of course, we will clean up that code later on, but let's do that for the time being. And the way to declare functions in PHP is to say public function and then the name of the function. In most cases, we do not necessarily, specifically when we're creating controllers, let's not add any arguments to the functions. Okay, you don't. Calligraphy doesn't allow you to do this. It will neglect them and ignore them, and nothing will happen. Okay, great. So now, what do we want our index function to do? Here's what I'm going to do. Because initially where we started, we wanted to eliminate this code from here and pass it on to the controller. Okay, so what I need to do is I'm going to take the echo from here, and I'm going to completely get rid of that second argument here, and I'll tell you what we will replace it by, and then we're going to put it in our method in here. So now our method index will return, this is my first paragraph. Okay, and in order for us to notice the change, I'm also going to add another echo here to say I am calling it from the controller, from the index controller. How about that? From the index method. Okay. And then I'm going to add another echo here, and I am going to say I am calling it from the banana method controller. All right, great. Now let's go back to the route. From our web.php, now we need to tell it what to do when the URI is left blank or we add a slash at the end. What I wanted to do is I want to call the controller. So I'm going to say I want to call project controller like that, but I'm going to have to specify what method within I want to call. In order to do this, you would use the at symbol, okay, and you would immediately type the name of the method. So I'm going to say I want to use this, and I want to use the index method, and I'm going to create another one right underneath, and I'm going to say when I say slash banana, I want to call the banana method. Notice over here that everything is in quotes and there are no parentheses or anything like this. You would just simply state the name of the controller and you put an at and then you state the name of the method. All right. So now with that, let's go and try it out. So now if I don't do anything and I press enter, you will see I am calling it from the index method controller, and this is my first test paragraph. That is correct. That is exactly what we wanted. And then if I do banana at the end, like that, it's going to say I'm calling it from the banana method controller. So notice how just simply from taking the URI, I was able to route it to two different methods within the code. This is brilliant, and this can be nested, and I can go on and add more and more things, and I will show you how to do all of this in a while. Now let's go back to the project controller, and what I want to point out is that the method index, you do not need to explicitly specify it in the web. So whenever you have at index, you could completely eliminate it and just say I want to call project controller, and the calligraphy and the code automatically knows that it needs to execute the index method. So let me prove that to you. Let's go back here, do enter, you still have the same output, okay? No matter whether there is an at index or not, it is taking the at index. Great. So now this is another way of handing over the code. Instead of writing it in here, we put it all in the controller. And I would suggest to always have a controller. Now in some cases you might say, but it's not worth it to create another file, to have just one output to display. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, from the moment you start having more than one statement, more than just a simple display, I would strongly recommend to create a controller for it. Okay, and the controller, when we start talking more about it and about its functionalities, it is a great packaged context where you can have access to all the functionalities of calligraphy directly from this class, which is not possible from this context over here. Okay, and I will point this out later on. All right, now I would like us to experiment a little further with that. So let's do now route get, okay, slash banana slash let's do slash banana slash back. Okay, why do I want to do this? Because I want to show you that different routes can always if you want to point to the same controller. Okay, and I could nest this one even more. So I could say banana back to home. Okay, I'm just creating whatever right now, but just to point out the point that you could nest as many as you want. So now if I go here and I do slash banana, I will get this is the banana method. But if I do slash banana slash back to home, now I am back to the index method, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, great. So far we learned how to do a callback function, which is the one we deleted. Then we learned how to hand off to the controller. Now there is something slightly more complex, but it's extremely beneficial. And it's really about two things. It's about a situation where you don't necessarily know what the user is going to enter. So let me now go back to a more realistic use case where you want to say, I want to showcase my projects. Okay, so in this one, I want to show maybe all my projects, but I want my user to potentially enter the ID of one particular project to look at or to see. So the ID can be 1, or it can be 2, or it can be 3, or it can be 4, etc. So you definitely do not want to create a route for 1, for 2, for 3, for 4. What you want to do is you want to somehow enter a form of a parameter into that URI. So how would you do this in Caligraphy? So let's do this. We're going to say when the user enters projects slash, and now I want to say I want something to represent my parameter ID. How do I do this? You would open curly brackets like that, and you would immediately name the name of a variable that would be called ID in this particular case. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it on to the controller, same controller, but I'm going to pass it on to another method. Let's call it a read project, like that. Camel case. Again, there's no convention over here. You can name them whatever you want, but I would like us to follow that convention where it's a camel case. Okay, so now let's go and create that method, and I am going to show you how you can get that parameter directly from the method itself. So now when you go to the controller, I'm going to do two things over here. And let's do, what did we call it? I forgot already. We said project, read project, like that. Here we go. All right, now I'm going to introduce you to something that I would strongly advise you to do with any class that you are experimenting with calligraphy. Since this is the first one we're experimenting with, so let's go ahead and try something together. There is a function called dump or var dump. Okay, if you remember the lecture on PHP primer, we talked about var dump, but calligraphy has another one called dump that it uses, which is exactly like var dump, but it allows you to see things in a slightly more interesting fashion. So when you use dump, it would dump anything to the screen. It doesn't necessarily have to be of a particular type like echo. Echo only outputs strings, whereas dump, it could be anything. It could be an array, it could be an object, anything. So what I would like us first to do in here, I would like us to dump what this whole object is. And in order to do this, you would use the variable or the pointer that is called this. This means I would like you to show me this whole object, what it is. And it's interesting to go and take a look at it because you're going to learn how this object is structured, and the more you learn about it, the more you know what tools and what parameters and what properties you could use with it. So let's go ahead and do this. So now I'm going to do project, and I can type anything really. And this is what my project controller is. My project controller is an object that has different properties in there. One of the properties is called loader. Another one is called the request. Another one is called model, connection, validator, and payment. Okay, those are properties that are given to you to use. Now from here you won't be able to see all the functions or all the methods that you could do on this controller. What you can see are the attributes or the variables that are contained within that you can publicly use, and we're going to see an example immediately right now. And the example that I want to show you is really the request property. Request is another object in calligraphy. It's another class and another object in calligraphy. And the controller itself, it does have an instantiation of the request. Okay? So by simply saying dump now this, in order to access a property from an object in PHP, you would use a dash and then like an arrow kind of thing. So dash and right arrow, and you would say, I want to access request. And now let's go see what request has in it. Let's dump it out. And this is what my request object that is contained within my controller has. It has everything that you need to know about the request that's been entered by the user. Okay, it has the method, which is a get method, right? Because that's what my route called. It has the full URI that you can see over here. It has a URI, it has URI component. It even can go down and tell you what user agent is being used. So this is information about the browser of the user. It has what sort of character encoding it accepts. Okay, so it accepts HTML, it accepts XML, it accepts PNGs and stuff like this. So what kind of headers it accepts, what types of encoding it accepts, what type of languages it's accepting, what the cookie session is, and then it has an item called parameters in here. And then under parameters, you have the URI again that was entered by the user. It could have more, and I will show you in a while. And if you look at under fetch, it really has ID in there, which is exactly our variable. Okay, so I'm doing all this to tell you that there is, what we could do is I could say dump this request, get my property fetch, and from fetch get me my variable name, which happens to be ID, and ideally this should give you a 1 in this case. And here we go, it is a 1. I could also go ahead and say hello, and it will give me a hello. I could say anything, and it will give me anything. All right, you get the point. So that is the whole point of the request class, is really to be able to do something with this URI that the user is giving us, and there is a lot to learn from it, and there's a lot we can take out of it. Now, I want to go on and continue with something in here to show you, but for that, I will immediately get rid of this and go back to request itself, like that. And what I'm going to do, in many cases, you might want to add to your query and say, I also want to look in particular into a keyword called hello. Okay, this is the get method does allow you to add some parameters to the end of your request. Okay, those are additional visible parameters that are okay to be visible to the user, and then you want to be able through your route to access this keyword. So let's go and take a look at what happens. In order for you to get the keyword, you would go to parameters and you can get the keyword, or similarly you can even fetch it from the fetch parameter. So now if I do this and then fetch, and I'm gonna fetch keyword, which is really what the user entered in the browser, I could get the hello. If I do keyword equal hello, my name is Dory, I will get the hello, my name is Dory. Okay? Now this is only advisable to be used with a GET request. When you're doing a post, usually you do not want to show what you're posting. Okay, so your query should never contain what you're posting. This is for security reasons. This is the whole point of post, is that your parameters are not passed along with your URI, but they're passed as part of the body of the request. And when we get to the post, you'll see how we can get this. But if you are following me, you would get them from the parameters, this one over here, from the parameters attributes that is in the request. Sorry, you would get them from this. That's where you would get the post. But we will see that when we talk about post a little more. All right. So now this gives us a little bit of an idea on what the request class has. Now I do want to spend a little more time with you on experimenting, or not experimenting, but at least seeing what some of the methods that you could use within the controller, and some of the methods that you could use with the request. And in order for us to get the full vision, the best way is to go onto the documentation of Caligraphy. When you go to that documentation, you go to the section called either request, routing request, or controllers. You will have the different ones. So let's go to controllers. As soon as I find it, here we go. If we scroll further down, you have a section called methods and properties. The properties are the one we just saw when we did our dump let's do a dump of this and compare. Okay, and the documentation will help you focus on the ones that are interesting to you. Some of them are used, by Calligraphy itself, and then they might not be needed. But at least you'll have an idea of what it is. So these are the properties. The properties are not functions; they are variables. So they are defined as variable, and as you can see, it has a request, it has model, it has connection, it has validator, and it has payment. And we will see all those down the road. We're gonna need them as we go. And then you see a set of methods that can be used on this controller. Now, most of these methods will become more applicable whenever we create a model. All right, so we're not doing this in the lecture today, but when we start creating our models, then all of these will start making sense, or even when we do the payments. So we will keep it, or even validation. Okay, so there's a bunch of those that can be used once we learn about those. But all I want you to know for this time, at this point in time, is really to know that there is a set of methods that can be used within the controller that are of extreme importance, and this is where to find them. Great. Now let's go to the request, because also request has its own set of properties and methods. We saw the properties already, okay? And it has a set of methods that also can be used. There is one called parameters, there is one called files, there is one called fetch, there is one called onceJSON. The fetch and the parameters, we already have seen them somehow. What they do really is they actually help you populate that variable fetch. Okay, so when I called, and I go back to the code here, when I did this request fetch, that variable has already called the function fetch for me by default. So I don't need to do it again. I can access it in the variable immediately. And same thing, it has called the parameters function for me, so I don't need to do it again. It is just a shortcut if you want. Now, in some cases, maybe you don't want to use this terminology, okay? You might want to use this terminology, which is I am going to call the function fetch and fetch the ID out of it. If I want to do this, then in that case, I will still get exactly the same results. If I do project / anything, I will still get the same result, except that I am directly calling the function. And similarly, when I do this with parameters. Okay, so again, this gives you some visibility over the different methods and functionalities that you could use with the request class. Files, we will use it more whenever we start posting a form. It's really a way to get the files that a user posts through a form. Okay, and parameters gets you all the other parameters that a user can post that are not necessarily files. All right, so these are the ones that are contained within each and every object. So when in the controller, we saw the methods that you can use within the controller. In the request, we saw the methods that you can use within the requests. Now, request happens to be called or instantiated from within the controller. So from there, you can call also request methods by applying this and then arrow request property that gives you access to all the features of the request class. Now there is another set of functions that I promised you at some point that we're gonna talk about, and those are the global methods. These global methods can be used from any context, whether you are in the controller class, whether you are in another class that you will create later on, whether you are in any class that you create of your own that is not extending anything from Calligraphy. Those global methods can be helpful to you, and those are contained in the core helpers over here. Okay, if you remember from our last lecture, under helpers there is a core helper generic class that has all those global methods that can be used across the board. Okay, now in order for you to have a more visible way of looking at this, there is a section in the Calligraphy documentation that talks about the core helpers, and I strongly advise you to go see them. Over here are all the helper methods that you can use in Calligraphy. Okay, some of them are related to the views, related to redirection, related to calling APIs. You can even instantiate a new request class from here, a new connection to the database, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are things related to the framework. Then comes a set of methods related to global variables. So things like if you want to create a session variable, things like you want to clear a session variable, if you want to save in the session, if you want to terminate the session. And also, if you remember at some point in the previous lecture, we did mention that there are some core settings. These core settings can be changed by calling specific methods. So if you call the script methods, this will allow you to change the some of the methods defined. Sorry, I called initialize, but it's actually under settings, core settings. It's under here. So any core helpers methods would help you change any one of these variables. So you can change the keywords, you can change the session, default metadata variables, you can change the session scripts that are contained within Calligraphy. You will understand all this when we start talking about metadata and views, but I just want you for this point in time to understand that there are ways and there are some methods provided to you to make changes to those core settings. Then there is a set of methods that would allow you to make changes or to manipulate strings and arrays, which can become very helpful. So, things that are that can help you get the relative time, for example. Encryption methods to encrypt, decrypt, and to generate some keys. Authentication methods, which we will understand more when we create our own login module or when we use the Calligraphy login module. And then some other ones related to image manipulations, which we might not necessarily talk about in this course. But if for whatever reason you want to create dynamic images that are created on the server, on the server side, and not necessarily on the browser side like JavaScript, you want them to be more dynamic, then in that case we use a third-party tool, and that third-party tool you can instantiate it this way, and you can start using it in multiple different ways. Okay, it's called Simple Image. It's a great library, and the way to use it, you just need to instantiate it directly into a controller, and then you can immediately start using it. If I get a chance towards the end, we might get the chance to look at it a little bit. So this summarizes what we wanted to talk about today, at least around controllers, around the routes, and around things like that. Now moving forward, I will somehow try to copy that code for you. It is still not interesting to have out there, since we did not create any functionality just yet. But in the next lecture, we will create things more related to the application that we want to create, and then we will start outputting to our GitHub. Okay, and I will make sure to have that code available for you on GitHub with a way that would explain how you could download it as well. All right, with that, we wish you a fantastic day, and we hope to see you in the next lecture.